And for a more in-depth discussion on this issue, we're joined by Dr. Jun-sok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Welcome to the program, Dr. Yang.
Happy to be here.
So let's start off with how it all started. Why is General Motors planning to shut down its factory in Kunsan?
Okay, well, let's first look at the known reasons. These are reasons that people mostly agree on. First, there was a switch in global demand from low gasoline, powered smaller cars, which GM Korea is very good at making, to larger cars because of the low oil prices, or to electric and non-gasoline using cars because of concerns about global warming. So the type of cars that GM Korea made was no longer popular. GM Korea actually made a lot of contribution to GM's bottom line up to about 2010, but because of the demand for these type of cars, smaller cars fell. That's when the GM Korea started to make substantial losses around 2015. And then because of the lower demand, GM withdrew from Europe. And most of GM Korea's output had been going to Europe through its Opel subsidiary, but when GM sold its Opel subsidiary, GM Korea had no place to sell its smaller cars to. And then they also had problems in the Korean market. They used to have about steady 10% of the Korean market, but now it's fallen to about 7.6%. And there's also lack of new models, new popular models, which are coming from GM headquarters. So those are some of the problems there. And then there's the problem of high cost, low productivity. The labor unions have been very successful in getting GM Korea to raise their wages. Their wages since 2005 has risen about 150%, though the inflation rate for that period was only about 45% from 2005 to last year. And their average pay, according to a lot of reports which are coming out, is about 87 million won, which is very, very well paid by Korean standards. Now, I don't have these numbers. Excuse me. And also, even though they were getting this higher salary, they were not known for high productivity. U.S. automotive trade paper ranked 148 factories throughout the world, and the Kunsan factory was ranked 130th.
That is very low.
Right. And so I have these numbers only for the automobile sector in general, not just GM Korea. But according to the Automobile Manufacturing Association, Korean automobile workers, at least in the Hyundai, GM, the larger companies, not the smaller suppliers, but the larger companies are now getting paid as much or higher than Toyota or Volkswagen. But their productivity in terms of hours required to build a car is about 11 to 26% lower than US or Germany. So Korea is now notorious for being a high-cost, low productivity country. So those are the known issues. Then there's the sort of issues which are suspicious. And these mostly concern GM, and there's more of these coming out, and evidence seems to be mounting for it. But still, these are still more suspected rather than proven. But GM has a transfer pricing problem. Whenever GM sends parts from its headquarters, or when they send government headquarters services such as central R&D or management, they may be overpricing their services or intermediate parts. And then GM has made loans to GM Korea, and they supposedly have made this at a rate which is much higher than market interest rates. And then because of the ordinary wage problem that we had last year, they were supposed to set aside some funds to pay for additional wages which were court rules which were part of ordinary wages, and the unions accused the GM Korea of not putting aside their money in a consistent fashion, so that the company seems to have lower profitability than it really does. And then finally, the timing of this problem is very suspicious. They gave a deadline of end of February. There's regional elections coming up during the summer. Yes, in November. So there's a lot of speculation that they're doing this to pressure the Korean government politically into giving them assistance.
Oh, sounds like a lot of complicated issues intertwined. Now, it goes without saying that Kunsan, a small city located in southwest of Seoul, will be hit hard by GM's decision. So Korea's trade and labor ministries are now busy trying to come up with measures to cushion the small city from the fallout. How much of an economic impact are we expecting if the factory is shut down in the end?
Okay, well, Kunsan was famous for being a manufacturing base for the old Daewoo Group, which GM Korea used to be part of. And it also houses Daewoo Shipbuilding.
Right.
And when Daewoo Group went out of business after the 97 Asian financial crisis, well, the Daewoo Motors Group was, in a sense, lucky to be bought out by GM Korea. But Daewoo Shipbuilding, well, they tried selling it, didn't really work out, so now it's still in government receivership and operated by Korea Development Bank. And the shipbuilding industry for the last 3 or 4 years have not been doing well at all. So the Gunsan area was already hit hard because of that, and now this will be coming on top of that. So it's become it has a potential to become a very serious depressed region, and government has recognized that, and it promised emergency actions.
Now, reports are trickling in on the meeting between South Korea's Trade Minister Paik Un-gyu and GM's head of international operations, Engle. And rumor has it that Korea Development Bank has laid out 8 preconditions before South Korean government can form the government support fund for GM. And those reportedly include submission of GM's long-term business plan and lowering debt interest rate. Do you think the two sides will be able to reach a settlement soon? Okay,
well, GM has signaled that they are willing to do something about some of these suspicious factors that we talked about earlier. So maybe reduce the interest rate that they're charging to GM Korea or change the debt to equity. But if you look at the 8 factors, some of them, most of them actually have to do with transparency issues. We talked about those suspicious issues,
right,
including the transfer pricing problem. In order to look at whether there's a transfer pricing problems or not, at the minimum, you need accurate information. And GM has been very reluctant to give out those information because they're saying that this is corporate confidential information. And it's in a sense, it's a similar problem we're having with chaebols. If you're passing parts from one part of the company to another, how do you price it? Because it's not a market transaction. So you really need a lot of information, and a lot of the 8 directives that were talked about has to do with making public that information. GM, I believe, agreed in principle, but the devil is in the details, especially in these legal, technical accounting issues. So we'll have to see exactly what kind of information that they give up. And then long-term plans, I think that's at the minimum what they need to put up. Because, well, GM Korea has to get back in the black, not only for GM, but for Korea. If we're actually going to support GM Korea, we need to make sure that we can pull out and taxpayers at least don't lose money. And the long-term management plan to bring GM Korea to black is at what's required minimally. We need a lot of that on top, but at least on the minimum, we need that long-term management plan.
Right, and we still need more details to be unveiled. Now, meetings are still ongoing and talks are still ongoing, but speculation is high that General Motors might completely withdraw its business from Korea if things don't work out well. Do you agree with that?
Okay, well, GM Korea's position is that they want to remain. I remember reading an article in a U.S. automotive trade paper last year. This was before the rumors about GM withdrawal really got started. It was earlier last year, but the article stated that GM headquarters were not really crazy about Korea's manufacturing lines. As we mentioned before, high cost, low productivity. But they really liked Korea's R&D and design departments. There was, at least the paper was speculating back then that if they could keep the design and R&D but get rid of the manufacturing, they would be happy. But I think right now it's all or nothing. So I think there's a good chance that perhaps GM Korea really does want to pull out. GM actually went through its own bankruptcy in 2009. It received assistance from the U.S. government to get itself out of that situation. But since then, GM has been trying to become very lean and mean. So any division that they're not making money from, they're withdrawing. They withdraw from Australia, they withdraw from India. We just mentioned that they sold off the Opel division from Europe. So if the Korean GM Korea is not profitable, then I think it's not out of the question that they will withdraw. But the problem is, will they stay in GM because it's profitable, because it's efficient, or whether because they'll be getting a lot of present from the government? And I think that's the crucial problem.
The South Korean government is also mulling turning the Kunsan factory into an electric vehicle factory, which is a method used in Australia when GM withdrew from there. Do you think that could be one viable solution?
It may be a viable solution in the long term, but to get around the problem that they have currently, I don't think it's the solution. And the reason is because, first of all, GM has offered that it will offer new models if government new models to produce in Korea if Korea government agrees to assist the GM Korea. But it takes years for the new production line to come online. So until then, GM Korea is not likely to see much profit from the new models. And then the electric car model, I think it's the Bolt that they're talking about. The problem with the Bolt model is that it's not a very profitable car. It may become profitable way down in the future. But for now, because the cost of batteries are so expensive, it's not a very profitable model. And if it's not very profitable, it's not going to help GM Korea in the short run.
So it will take a long time. The shutdown of the GM factory is, of course, linked to America's growing protectionism. But is it also linked to the amendment of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement the Trump administration is pushing for?
Okay, I can see the Trump administration using this to sort of pressure Korea into making some decisions which are favorable to the United States. But I cannot really see how it affects the negotiation of the Korus FTA itself. Korus FTA does have an investment chapter, but if they want to change the investment chapter, then both sides will have to agree. But the United States, the USTR has not submitted negotiation objectives to the U.S. Congress. So I think they were looking for a very small-scale renegotiation, not changing much on the wording of the Korus agreement, but rather on the technical details, because that can be done without reporting to the U.S. Congress. And they were expecting most of the changes to be made on the Korean side. So if you want to change the major conditions on the Korus FTA, I think we'll have from the United States, they'll probably have to report new objectives to the U.S. Congress. So I think this is more of a pressure to get Korea to get in the right mood, more than dealing with the technical aspects of the agreement.
Well, that is all the time we have for you today. Thank you for coming in and sharing your insights.
Thank you.